And there are cats, so you'll want to see the pictures if you like cats. So you might want to move somewhere where you can see them. It's green. Now is it on? Okay, that's better. All right. So I'll let everyone move if you want to. Sorry, everybody. Move it this way. Is that better? I don't want to break it. Okay. All right. It doesn't like my face. All right, I'll try to talk loud too. So, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Sarah Moon. I am a member of the University Church. I go to the Vesper service. If you've never seen me, that's why. And I am a seminary student at Methodist Theological School. And so a couple months ago, I had the opportunity to go with my seminary to Israel, Palestine. And this is why Julian has invited me to speak tonight. So actually, I'm going to start with a Bible story since we're in a church. So you remember in John 4, where Jesus meets a Samaritan woman at the well. She draws him some water. Jesus offers her living water, and then he reveals that he knows some personal details about her life. She responds saying, "Sir, I see that you are a prophet. Our ancestors worshiped God on this mountain, but you say that the place where people must worship is in Jerusalem." Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem." So, neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. I bring up this story because this phrase is really interesting to me in light of my recent trip. So I've been to both of the holy sites mentioned in this passage. First of all, this mountain refers to Mount Gerizim, which is the holy mountain for people who practice the Samaritan faith. In fact, there are still Samaritans around today who still worship God on this mountain. It's considered holy to Samaritans because they believe this is where Abraham offered up his son Isaac to God. Jewish people, however, do not believe that Mount Gerizim is where Abraham offered up Isaac. They believe this happened somewhere around here, at the Second Temple in Jerusalem. This was destroyed in about 70 AD, and all that's left is the wall that you see here, but it's still a holy site for Jewish people. So I guess the hour that Jesus refers to when we will worship God neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem is not quite here yet. In fact, things seem to have gotten even more complicated. Also on the site of the temple is the Dome of the Rock. Muslims actually believe, I believe that Muslims think Abraham offered up his son Ishmael in Mecca. However, they still also worship God in Jerusalem. The Dome of the Rock stands on the site where the Prophet Muhammad got on his night visit, was taken up into the heavens for his night visit and had some visions from God. So to complicate matters even further, we're going to bring the Christians into this. So that's some of us here. Christians think that this happened not at Mount Gerizim, where Abraham offered up Isaac. They think this happened, some of them think it happened at Golgotha, which is where the Church of the Holy Sepulchre now stands traditionally. So this is one of the most holy sites for Christians. But it's not even that simple, because then there's other Christians who say, no, Golgotha is not where the Church of the Holy Sepulchre stands. That's at the Garden Tomb, which is a tomb that was unearthed in the 1800s outside of the Jerusalem walls. And then there's this other whole group of people who believe that Abraham offered up Isaac not at Mount Gerizim, not in Mecca, not at the Jerusalem temple, and not at Golgotha. Bob Dylan fans, of course, think this happened on Highway 61. So if I had to sum up the Holy Land in one phrase, it would be pretty much the phrase I would use to sum up any land where there are multiple people living together and trying to agree despite difference. It's complicated. I started with the story of the woman at the well because I think the words of Jesus represent a sentiment that a lot of us sometimes feel. We want a world that's less complicated than the one we have. A world where we can all worship the same God without fighting over where that worshiping takes place. Some of us might envision a time in the future when we're all going to set aside our differences and worship God in the same way. Other of us long for this imagined past where people maybe got along better than they did today. However, since my trip to the Holy Land, I'm not sure there ever was a time, or honestly, that there ever will be a time where this is going to be the case. So with this in mind, I have a few themes that I would like us to just keep in mind as I show you some pictures from the Holy Land. First of all, multiculturalism. I argue that multiculturalism is not a modern phenomena. It's something really intrinsic to our condition as humans. It's something that has always existed and probably will always exist, and I don't think we would want it any other way, honestly. Secondly, even within the religious groups, there are no monoliths. Even among groups that you would think would have a distinct culture, like Muslim culture, Christian culture, Jewish culture, there is so much diversity. And finally, I want to keep in mind the theme of peace as embracing difference. So I'm up here, I'm a white Christian American citizen. I'm not going to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict tonight. But I do hope I can approach this complicated topic with care and respect. And I hope you'll challenge me if you think I'm failing to do so. But I would argue that unless we abandon this imaginary notion that everyone has to be the same, we're never going to have peace in our world. The only way for us to all be the same is by violently suppressing anyone who disagrees with us. And so if we want peace, we have to learn to celebrate our differences rather than fear them. So I hope this presentation will help us gain a greater understanding of what we don't understand. And so let's get started. We started in the Galilee, which is northern Israel. After leaving the airport, we pulled into Nazareth, and after our 16-hour flight, we were feeling about half past dead. It's a joke. The band, anyone? So the place we ended up laying our heads was at the Sisters of Nazareth guest house. This is located next to the Basilica of the Annunciation. There's a great view of Nazareth from the roof, and underneath the guest house actually lies the remains of a Byzantine church, and then underneath those remains is a first-century family home. Now, the nun pictured here made sure to let us know that we have no idea who actually lived in this house, but archaeologists think that the Byzantines believed that this was the house of Jesus as a child, and that's why they built a church on top of it. So that was kind of cool to sleep over the place where people think Jesus might have been his childhood home. But of course, we have no way of knowing. But anyway, Nazareth is actually it's a predominantly Arab area of the Israeli state. It's about 69% Muslim and about 30% Christian. And so it's got one of the largest Christian populations in Israel. So you can kind of see with the signs, I think this one is arguing that Jesus is the God of Israel. You have one here that's kind of saying that it's a Muslim sign with a passage from the Quran arguing that Christians, Muslims, and Jews are not that different. And there's also lots of Christmas decorations up all year round in Nazareth, which if you live in Nazareth, I guess it can be Christmas all year round. So, at the Nazareth Baptist School, we met with the author of a book called When Your Neighbor is the Savior. His name is Boutros Mansour. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but he gave us some background information on what's going on in Israel, Palestine today. So in the early 1900s, some European Zionists began moving to Palestine for a variety of reasons. A big one was to escape anti-Semitism in Europe. The problem was there were already people living in Palestine. So that caused a lot of conflict for several decades. In 1948, the UN decided they were going to divide the land between Israelis and Palestinians. So the problem became, what happens to the Palestinians whose homes are in the land that the UN came in and decided this is Israeli land now? So some people were forced out, some voluntarily left, and others, like Mansour, stayed, and some of the people who stayed were able to become Israeli citizens. Mansour identifies as a Palestinian Israeli. He says, "Israel is my country, but Palestinians are my people, and my country is fighting with my people." He believes that Palestinians and Israelis are treated as second-class citizens in Israel because they're not Jewish. So as a Christian Israeli Palestinian, he is excluded from many jobs. He's excluded from military service. It's hard for many Palestinians to find work. And he really encouraged us to go back and tell people in the United States that the situation is not as simple as Jews versus Muslims, and that it's a lot more complicated than that. Our last stop in Nazareth was at the Church of the Annunciation. So this is the site that's traditionally celebrated as where the angel Gabriel came to Mary and told her she was going to have a son. So that happened in this cave here, according to tradition. The cool thing I liked about this church was that they asked Christians from all over the world to contribute artwork of Mary. And so even though you have the same religion contributing artwork about the same religious figure, you see all of the diversity that is within this one group. So you've got Mary from Peru, or Philippines. You've got Mary from Japan. I don't remember where this one was from. Stick figure land. You've got Mary from Ethiopia. This is the United States. I don't know what we were going for there. This one's from Poland, and this one's from Mexico, and there's so many others. This one's from Peru. I couldn't show you every picture of it because they're everywhere around this building. And finally, we have our first cat sighting. This cat met me outside the Church of the Annunciation and wanted some belly rubs, so of course I obliged. After Nazareth, we visited Zippori, which is also called Sepphoris, not to be confused with the Final Fantasy villain. Abe gets that joke, he would laugh. The image here was a mosaic found in the house of a nobleman. It is called the Mona Lisa of Galilee because it's so really neat. It looks like a painting almost rather than a mosaic, I think. My favorite part of Zippori was an ancient synagogue that was found, and this is a floor mosaic on that ancient synagogue. What I like the most is that under this mosaic, which has the Ark of the Covenant and the candelabras, there is a zodiac wheel with figures of Greek gods and goddesses on it. So this really kind of challenges the idea of a monolithic Judaism that never interacted with other cultures of the time in the first century. And here's where my presentation goes in the toilet, because this is an ancient toilet. That is the Greek word for hygiene, I believe. And actually, archaeologists love finding toilets because people drop things in them and don't go to get them out, because why would you? And so you can learn a lot about people if you find their toilets. So interesting. We stopped at a quiet spot along the Jordan River, and being good Methodist seminarians, we remembered our baptism in the Jordan. We went to Tel Dan, where we found a gate that dates from the time of Solomon. Here's me standing inside the gate where like the throne would have been, so it's a good place to stand. And now if you've read about high places in the Hebrew Bible, would have been one of those high places, I believe. This is where sacrifices would have taken place outside of the Jerusalem temple. The authors of the Hebrew Bible did not like these, but as archaeological records show, they still happened. So we cannot just read the Hebrew Bible and assume that covers everything that has to do with Jewish culture or ancient Hebrew culture at the time. This is a gate that actually dates back from the time of Abraham, not my husband. He's not that old. In Banyas, it was another reminder of the multiculturalism in the first century. There are actually several temples and shrines to Greek gods in this area. This one is the Temple of Pan and the Dancing Goats, the original #Goat Church. I really appreciated the Court of Nemesis, who is the goddess of vengeance. I liked that one. And then here we are in front of the Temple of Zeus. In Chorazim, which is also a temple, or it's just a city mentioned in the New Testament, Jesus actually says Chorazim is going to be destroyed worse than Sodom and Gomorrah. And it was destroyed, but not until like the 5th century, so I don't know. They also found a synagogue here with more Greek kind of pagan images. So here, this is Medusa, which was my favorite part. In Beit Alpha, again, we have a situation of a synagogue that has a zodiac wheel. Apparently, these were actually very popular at the time. They explained at Beit Alpha that Jewish people of the first centuries would have seen the zodiac as kind of representing God's created order of the universe. And they hypothesized that it was okay to have pagan images in a synagogue as long as the Ark of the Covenant was on top, which it is. And I pressed play too fast, but cats love this place. We actually walked in and there was like a cat just like chilling on the zodiac wheel. He ran away before I could take a picture, but I got a picture of this cat. He was very nice. Anyway, so we went to the Sea of Galilee. We rode on a boat, and it's actually a boat based on a boat that was found in the Sea of Galilee that dates from the 1st century. So they call this the Jesus boat. It's a very clever name. Actually, when we were on the Jesus boat on the water, you could see Syria from the Lake of Galilee, and you could see smoke coming out of the mountains. And we asked our guide, like, what's going on over there? And he said that's probably smoke from the Syrian conflict that's going on right now. And so it was kind of weird and jarring to be on this calm, peaceful lake and to be at the place where Jesus supposedly calmed the storm and walked on water, and to see this storm off in the distance that no one's actually calming right now, unfortunately. We did get to eat at St. Peter's restaurant, and we ate fish caught in the Sea of Galilee. It was actually pretty good. And as you can imagine, cats love this place because the owners feed them the fish, so it's great. I love this place. We went to Capernaum, which is the hometown of St. Peter in the New Testament. And this site is venerated as the home of St. Peter, supposedly. And we met another cat there. He was also very nice. And then we head off to Jerusalem. Now, I've already talked a little bit about the Temple Mount area in Jerusalem. We've got the Western Wall here. Again, this temple was destroyed in 70 AD, and all that remains is this wall. As you can see, it's segregated by gender. Men go on one side and women are on the other. Until actually very recently, it was considered illegal for Jewish women to pray or read the Torah at the Western Wall. So a group of women got together, Jewish women, and called themselves the Women of the Wall, and went and would pray out loud at the Western Wall in order to challenge this and to say that women should be allowed to pray and read Torah at the wall. They were successful, and the law is no longer in play, but as we were told by one Jewish feminist who spoke with us, you can still face harassment and violence for doing this, so it's still not easy. Beyond the Western Wall, you have the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is a Muslim site. We couldn't go in it, unfortunately, because only Muslims are allowed in, but I don't know if cats are Muslims or they just don't care because they're running in and out the doors the whole time we were there. It was great. And then near the Al-Aqsa Mosque is the Dome of the Rock, which we've already mentioned is one of the most holy sites in Jerusalem. We got there just in time because right after we got there, like the day after, Ramadan started, so that this area was filled with thousands of worshipers from all over the world, and there was no way we could have gotten anywhere close if we had come a day later. So that was pretty neat that we got to see that. So after that, we walked around the Mount of Olives. In the center is the Church of All Nations, which is called that because Christians from all over the world donated money to help fund this building. That is right outside of the Garden of Gethsemane, which is where Jesus and his disciples prayed before the crucifixion, according to the New Testament. The Garden of Gethsemane was really neat because they have olive trees there that date back about 2,000 years. So they would have been around at the first century, around the time of Jesus. So that was really cool to see. And of course, there were cats around, but this guy had somewhere to be, obviously. He didn't want to stop for a picture. So we also visited the site where Jesus taught his disciples to pray the Our Father. There's a basilica there, and it's covered in the Our Father written about just about every language you can imagine. You've got, I think, Cherokee here, and I can't read the other ones from here, but like they're everywhere. And every language you can imagine, from ancient Samaritan to Esperanto to Braille. They don't have emoji language yet, so we need to petition that, I think. Here is the site where tradition says Jesus ascended into heaven. I'm sure Julian loves this one because they say you can see the footprint of Jesus as he went off into the heavens, which there are people kissing it, which I'm sure there's lots of germs. I didn't kiss it. Anyway, back at our hotel, which is the Hotel Golden Wall, we met with some more speakers who gave us insight into life in Jerusalem. I already mentioned the Jewish feminist that we spoke to. She told us about some more social justice issues in Jerusalem. One of them is LGBT people in Israel have a real difficult time marrying if they want to marry a same-sex partner because their marriages must be approved by the state rabbi, and the state rabbi is more orthodox and so doesn't really approve those kind of marriages. Religious people have been stabbed at pride festivals. It's really a contentious issue in Jerusalem right now. Racism is also a major problem. She spoke about Jewish women who are encouraged not to date Arab men, and when Arab men do date Jewish women, they have been taken and beaten in city centers for this. So racism is a huge problem. She also speaks about ultra-Orthodox communities that advocate for gender segregation in public spaces, like on buses. And this affects all women, not just ultra-Orthodox women. So this is also a problem that she was trying to address. Women who don't meet certain modesty standards are often harassed, or people might boycott schools that allow women to be teachers because of these rules. So she spoke about some efforts to make Jerusalem a safer place for women and for Palestinians. Another speaker we listened to was a Palestinian Muslim from Jerusalem. So he spoke of the ways that the state of Israel has been whittling away at Palestinian land. For instance, he claims the state makes it almost impossible for Palestinians to get building permits. And so in order to build homes and shops, they have to build illegally. And then the Israeli government will come in and bulldoze them. So this is a real problem. And the state is often revoking resident statuses of Palestinians living in Israel, leaving a lot of Palestinians as stateless people who have nowhere to go. Until 1994, he says the Israeli government controlled the public school curriculum, and so people could not even have control over what they were going to teach their children in the West Bank. Another problem is in some places in the West Bank, like Jericho, people are only allowed 1 hour of water access a day or even less, and so water is very scarce, whereas Israeli settlers who are there illegally in the West Bank will have swimming pools and plenty of water access and will actually sell it to Palestinians at a marked up price. So obviously, these two speakers are both addressing some of these problems in different ways and from different positions. Both kind of supported a movement called BDS, which is Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions. So this calls for a peaceful boycott of the state of Israel as a way of protesting these human rights injustices. It's kind of difficult, however, because in Israel it's actually illegal to support BDS, even though it's a peaceful movement. So according to one speaker, Palestinians can be arrested just for making a Facebook post that promotes BDS. So that's not very fun. Anyway, we followed along the way of the cross in Jerusalem, which according to tradition is the path that Jesus walked on the way to his crucifixion. This is obviously a path that a lot of Christians follow, but it does pass through the Muslim part of town, so You can see the lights up for Ramadan. You can see paintings on the wall celebrating those who have made pilgrimages to Mecca. And you can also see Israeli flags flying in front of the building. So you kind of have all these three religions just kind of coming together on this path. This is supposedly a place where Jesus put his hand on the wall and it melted the wall. I don't know why it melted the wall, but it did. There was a cat outside here, and he was talking to me. I didn't know what he was saying. Probably telling me why Jesus' hand melted the wall, but I couldn't understand it. So then, the way of the cross ends at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. This is a church that is shared by several Christian denominations. It contains the site where Jesus was supposedly crucified. It also contains the traditional site of Jesus' tomb, where I got yelled at by a priest for taking a picture. It was bad. Anyway, you would think, I would love to be able to say that the Church of the Holy Sepulchre being shared by all these Christian denominations is a great example of people getting along despite difference. But unfortunately, its history is one of squabbling and violence breaking out among these denominations over who controls what part of the church. This ladder actually tells a story about this. Eventually, in order to keep the peace, a bunch of agreements were signed saying, we can't change anything in this church because people are fighting over it, so we just got to keep it how it is. Well, when these agreements were signed, this ladder was up there. That was in the 1700s. So the ladder is still there. No one can move it. Actually, whenever it rots away, just because it's so old, they have to get a new ladder and put it up. Otherwise, all these fights break out. So sometimes the price of peace is just leaving the ladder where it is. Anyway, despite these difficulties, the cats love it here. So we visited the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem. This was a good reminder that the Holocaust did not happen in a vacuum. It didn't come out of nowhere. It was actually the end result of about 2,000 years of Christian anti-Jewish theology, and also that combined with modern anti-Semitism, which used science and sociology and anthropology to prove that some people were less human than others. It's also a good reminder that when we talk about Israel, Palestine, here in the West, we need to remember we're not pointing fingers over there to say, look what you guys are doing wrong, because our countries have been complicit in this and complicit in pushing people out and telling people that they don't belong here. And so we need to make sure our societies are doing the right thing before we start pointing fingers sometimes. Places like Sabeel, which is a Palestinian liberation theology center, comes up with theologies that challenge other theologies that exclude others. So they both challenge the oppression of the Israeli state against Palestinians and the complicity of Western Christians in this kind of oppression. They call for a theology that is liberating and just for everybody. So I have some books on that back table if you want to take a look at them afterward that I bought. I haven't read them yet, so I can't loan them out to you, but maybe one day I'll get to them. Ask me after seminary is over. And we were there on Pentecost Sunday. Actually, that was our free day. And so a few of us decided we were going to find a church to attend on Pentecost. We ended up in St. George's Cathedral, which is an Anglican church whose congregation is both English and Arabic. Everyone reads the liturgy together in their own language, which is really cool. Additionally, on this particular Sunday, Christians from all over the world were traveling to this church to participate in Pentecost. And so they were all reading the liturgy together in their own language, and you had about 600 people all speaking different languages on Pentecost Sunday in Jerusalem. And so that was a really neat experience. And even the cats were out celebrating. Our final site that we went to in Jerusalem was the Pool of Bethesda. You might remember this from the book of John. This is where the angel would come down and stir the pool at Bethesda, and then the first person to touch the water would be healed. We didn't see any angels, but there was a cat. This is also the traditional site of the birthplace of the Virgin Mary. So there's a statue of her at Bethesda with her mother, St. Anne. And we also found a little kitten and her mom there, so I thought that was cute. So after Jerusalem, we headed to the West Bank. which is territory that belongs to Palestinians according to that UN decision that we talked about earlier. Although there are many settlements, illegal settlements of Israelis who have moved into the West Bank trying to kind of take that land back. So there's a border wall that separates Israel from the West Bank. And actually, a lot of our speakers pointed out that this border wall makes it very hard for Palestinians to get into Israel, which means since resources are kind of cut off from the West Bank, it's hard to get proper medical care, proper education, proper resources. You can also see here, kind of at the top of that building, the little black specks of water tanks that have to be on almost every building in the West Bank because you never know when the water's going to get shut off. And you never know how much you're going to have, especially in the summer months. We went to a refugee camp and got a tour. We met another speaker who kind of gave us the history of refugee camps in the West Bank. So in the 1940s, as we have already covered, many Palestinians lost their homes because of this UN decision that said this is Israeli land now. So some ended up in these refugee camps like the Dahaisha refugee camp. I have no idea how to pronounce that, so I'll try my best. But in the 1950s, let's see. So when this first happened, a lot of people ended up living in tents. There were no buildings, and a lot of people died because of the harsh conditions. In the 1950s, the UN provided these small dwelling places that are still around, and families would live in these tiny dwelling places. There was no electricity or sewage in this camp until the 70s. Today, there are about 14,000 people living in this overcrowded camp. I believe it said it's less than a kilometer in size. So it's this tiny area. You have buildings on top of each other. Like, they're right next to each other, and you have to, like, squeeze through to get through. It's so crowded. There's no privacy. According to our speaker, security forces from a nearby Israeli settlement will come to the camps about twice a week and attack people or arrest people. There's often no water, there's no privacy, and there's absolutely no space. And so, according to our guide, soldiers will often falsely accuse members of this camp of plotting terrorism and arrest a lot of young people especially. If people die in jail, their bodies are not given back to their families until their sentence is served. So if you serve a 50-year sentence and you die after 25 years, your family has to wait another 25 years to get your body back. And so this is a sign, one of several signs up, mentioning the names of the people who have died in these prisons and asking for their bodies back. You will also see a lot of graffiti around. According to our guide, this is because for many years, one could be arrested by Israeli soldiers for owning books or any written materials in these camps. So people used to communicate by graffiti, by writing it on the walls. He called it like the early form of social media of the refugee camps. So this tradition continues today. This little guy you'll see a lot on Palestinian. I don't know what he's called, but he's kind of a Palestinian symbol of liberation. Some of these graffiti messages also remind us again in the West to not point fingers and to recognize the flaws of our own society. This one says, "To Palestine with love," from the Mohawk people who, as we probably know, are in a similar situation in our country. So, according to our guide, people who live in these camps often feel very desperate. They're caught between oppression from one state and between groups like Hamas, who promise freedom for Palestinians, but not religious freedom. And so, after many years of living in these places, a lot of young people are leaving and then losing their citizenship, and they aren't able to go back. So it's a lot going on there, and a lot to process. Anyway, we stayed at Bethlehem, and we stayed at a guest house right next to the traditional site of the birth of Jesus, which is pictured here. Then we headed to Samaria, where we visited Jacob's well. There's actually still water in this well, and I drank some of it. It was pretty good. The church that houses Jacob's well the fact that it's in the West Bank is controversial to both Jews and Muslims. As you can see, there are bullet holes still in the door because every now and then this church gets attacked by people who don't like that it's there. In the 1900s, a priest was murdered by an Israeli settler, and he's kind of honored as a martyr at this church. It is popular with the cats, at least. Also in Samaria, we met with actual Samaritans. This is one of the high priests of the Samaritan religion. So today in the Samaritan region, there are about 400 Samaritans living there. They have to live in Samaria because their whole religion centers around Mount Gerizim, which we saw earlier, and if you move away, you can't practice your religion because you have to do it on Mount Gerizim. So there's only about 400. They still follow the 5 books of Moses, the Torah, but they read it in the Samaritan language, which they say is older and more accurate than biblical Hebrew, which is what Jewish people read in. So they religiously follow all of the purity laws, and they still perform animal sacrifices. And according to this man, they are short on women right now. So he told us to all go home and tell our friends, if anyone wants a Samaritan husband, there's plenty of single men around. Like, come on over. Anyone? No? So they have some cleverly named liquor stores and very good Samaritan cats. One of the final sites we visited in the West Bank was Herodian. So does everyone remember that guy, Herod the Great? He wasn't called Herod the Great because he was a super nice guy. In fact, in that regard, he was pretty awful. Like, he murdered his own family and stuff, I think. He was pretty much the worst. But he did build some neat stuff, or at least he hired other people to build some neat stuff. So he wanted a palace, and he wanted it to be on a mountain. So he found this mountain, and he was like, okay, I'm going to build it there. But then he realized, oh, wait, I can't see Jerusalem from this mountain. So he didn't like the view. So he said, okay, well, that's fine. I'll just take this mountain and move it somewhere else. Slightly to the left, no big deal, right? So he did. He hired some people, and they dug up this mountain, and they built another mountain. So as you can see, that mountain there is entirely human-made, which is kind of impressive. So I'm kind of at the end of my presentation, and I have to admit, when I was putting this together, it was tempting to feel discouraged when I came to the end of this. Humans have a hard time getting along. Like, we hurt each other, we steal from each other, we impose our religious beliefs on each other. Meanwhile, terrible people like Herod have the power to move mountains. So what power do the rest of us have to fix the world in light of that? So here's what gives me some hope. On Herodian, that man-made mountain that we just saw, there are these little yellow shrubs that have little yellow flowers on them. These are called mustard trees. So their seeds look like this. They're very small, like almost like specks of dirt. And maybe you remember what Jesus said about mustard seeds. So you don't have to be Herod the Great to move a mountain. According to Jesus, if we have even those little specks of faith, we can do the same thing. So rather than get discouraged at these mountains of justice and violence in our world, I would encourage us all to sum up the little faith that we have in God and in humanity, even if it ends up just being a little speck like that. And love God, love others, and trust that God can use our small acts of faith to do great things. So that is all I have. Does anyone have any questions?